In July of 1976, the Israeli Defense Forces carried out Operation Thunderbolt, a rescue of Israeli citizens being held by Palestinian terrorists in Uganda from a hijacked airliner. In April of 1980, U.S. forces attempted Operation Eagle Claw, a rescue of U.S. Embassy personnel being held by Iranian terrorists in Tehran. By any measure, the Israeli operation was a success. 102 out of 106 hostages rescued. All of the terrorists, as well as 45 Ugandan soldiers that were supporting the terrorists, killed. 11 planes destroyed on the ground to prevent pursuit of the Israeli U.S. by air. American results were a little less stellar. 0 hostages rescued, 0 terrorists killed, 8 Americans killed, and 7 aircraft either destroyed or abandoned in Iran. There are many similarities in the strategic situations. Dozens of hostages being held in enemy territory across long distances. The time frames are roughly the same, within 4 years of each other. Equipment, technology, very similar, especially given the amount of U.S. military hardware that had been given to the Israelis or sold to the Israelis over the years. As a matter of fact, the aircraft that delivered the 2 strike forces, or the strike force and the would-be strike force, were all American-made C-130s, to illustrate the similarities in equipment. We will here attempt to analyze the success of one operation and the utter failure of the other through the crisis management lenses of leadership, communication, and strategic platform. Israeli leadership, Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin and Defense Minister Shimon Peres disagreed on the proper course of action to take in regard to the hijacking and hostages being held. Prime Minister Rabin wanted to negotiate with the terrorists and was even considering releasing the 40 Palestinian terrorists that Israel held, that the terrorists in Uganda were demanding. He believed that there was not enough time to properly plan and conduct a rescue operation. Defense Minister Peres favored military action, but did understand that he really didn't have a plan in place for doing so. As fate would have it, as the Israelis were attempting to negotiate for more time before the terrorists began killing hostages, the terrorist benefactor Idi Amin, president of Uganda, was also requesting that they hold off for a few days so he could attend an African leadership conference. The 3 extra days that were granted gave the Israelis the time they needed to mount the operation, to plan and conduct it. Once Prime Minister Rabin realized that he had enough time to plan an operation, there was enough time for the military to plan it, he got 100% behind it. The Israelis presented a united front. They were decisive, and they moved forward without any ego clashing or competing agendas. On the U.S. side, the U.S. it was 6 months in between the time that the Americans were seized at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran and a rescue attempt was even attempted. That would be Operation Eagle Claw. In that 6-month period, the U.S. did not even attempt to plan a military intervention, mostly out of the influence of Secretary of State Cyrus Vance, notoriously opposed to the use of force, who firmly believed that negotiation would bring the hostages home, even as he yielded no results for months. President Carter, James Earl Carter, deferred to Vance in this situation for the entirety of that time period, to the point where it almost seemed like he was afraid of Vance. And when he did finally listen to the bug being put in his ear by National Security Advisor Brzezinski and agreed to attempt a rescue operation of American hostages, he actually waited until Vance was out of town to even hold that briefing. It was attended by Vance's top deputy, Warren Christopher, who told Vance nothing of it. The President of the United States actually waited until someone that he appointed that worked for him was gone in order to circumvent that individual's wishes and actually conduct a military operation. Vance, when he heard about it, was so disgusted that he resigned. So American leadership was very fragmented, very weak, and it is worth pointing out that while a weak American leadership did not cause the Iranian Revolution, which led to the hostages being taken, it was certainly a contributing factor, as Shah Reza Pahlavi was being told by Secretary Vance to negotiate with the revolutionaries, to appease them, to enter into some kind of power sharing, to even leave the country. Meanwhile, NSA Brzezinski was actually telling him that he needed to crack down, that he needed to take a hardline approach to the revolutionaries, that he needed to grind them into dust. Meanwhile, the supposed boss of both of those men, President Carter, was telling the Shah, who was supposed to be an ally of the United States, telling him absolutely nothing, which contributed to the confusion, which eventually led to the Shah's decision to simply flee the country, because he did not know what his strongest ally was actually going to do, if anything. Perhaps even thought that he was going to be thrown under the bus. And so the picture being presented is an accurate one, that Israeli leadership was very strong, very precise, very decisive. American leadership was waffling, weak, two-faced, for lack of a better term. Communications, the second leg of the milking stool, reflected this as well. Israeli communication reflected the operation and the leadership. It was clear, concise, it was simple. The Israelis took off from Tel Aviv, they landed and refueled in Nairobi, they landed at Entebbe Airport and launched the assault. The American plan involved multiple forward operating bases, unnecessarily involved every branch of the military and all of the inherent conflicts of command that presented at that time. And communications were all over the board. It almost seemed like the United States went out of her way to create a communications nightmare for forces in the field. And so the communication leg reflected the leadership leg, whereas the Israelis were precise and smooth and on point, the Americans were weak and confused and sort of all over the place. Post-op communications were the same. The Israelis stayed on message. They talked about the evils of the terrorists and the heroic actions of the Israeli soldiers to rescue the poor hostages, whereas after the failure of the operation, President Carter went on television and admitted that the U.S. had attempted to carry out a covert operation and failed miserably. It's worth stating again that the President of the United States went on television and not only admitted to a covert operation, but admitted that it had failed drastically. As they say, the first rule of Fight Club, and as in covert ops, is to never talk about Fight Club. The strategic platform, the Israelis were battle-tested. The Sayeret Maktal, the Special Forces counterterrorism unit that carried out the operation, had been in existence for almost 20 years. They conducted operations all over the world. They specialized in carrying out operations in enemy territory. The American operation was attempted by Delta Force. This was a new organization at the time. This was to be their first operation. They were not combat tested. So much of the leadership was in Vietnam, though, in an entirely different tactical situation. There are no deserts in Vietnam. The Americans were simply ill-equipped to carry out a mission of this nature. And so the strategic platform, again, reflected the leadership and it reflected the communications. It simply wasn't there. While the Israelis, given 3 days, could plan an operation 3,000 miles away and successfully execute it in a matter of hours, the Americans, given 6 months, could really come up with nothing because nothing existed to conduct that kind of operation. Although, in conclusion, the lessons learned by the Americans were very valuable and well applied. The 160th Special Operations Regiment, the Night Stalkers, the low-level, high-speed night ops, helicopter pilots are some of the best in the world, and then were born out of Operation Eagle Claw. They fall under the Joint Special Operations Command. JSOC was also formed out of Operation Eagle Claw and itself falls under Special Operations Command. SOCOM was also formed out of Operation Eagle Claw. And so the United States is one of the best positioned countries in the world to carry out this sort of operation now from lessons that were learned as a result of the failure of the Carter administration's attempt to rescue American hostages in Tehran. Thank you.